There are monsters who hide in the dark. And then there are monsters who hide in plain sight, smiling, shaking hands, and waving at children. John Wayne Gacy was one of them. For years he was known as the friendly neighbor, the hard-working contractor, the man who entertained kids as Pogo the Clown. A man loved by his community, admired by local politicians, respected by neighbors, and even trusted by parents. But beneath the cheerful grin and painted red nose, something evil was festering. Behind the walls of his suburban home in Norwood Park, Chicago, lay a secret so horrifying that even seasoned detectives would never forget what they uncovered. This is the story of John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, a man who lived a double life, one of laughter and one of terror. Early life. The making of a monster. John Wayne Gacy Jr. was born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois. The world around him was ordinary. A working-class neighborhood, Catholic schools, small homes lined along quiet streets. But Gacy's childhood wasn't ordinary. His father, John Sr., was an alcoholic, violent, and deeply insecure man. He ruled the house through fear. Gacy's mother, Marion, was gentle but powerless. She tried to protect her son from his father's rage, but she could never shield him completely. John Jr. was often called names: Sissy, Mama's boy. His father would beat him, ridicule him, and tell him he'd never be a real man. This emotional abuse carved scars deep into the boy's mind, scars that never truly healed. Despite the turmoil, Gacy craved his father's approval. Every report card, every achievement, every act of kindness was an attempt to be noticed, to be loved. But his father never gave him that satisfaction. Instead, he gave him silence, hatred, and shame. At school, Gacy was withdrawn and awkward. He suffered from blackouts caused by a brain clot and spent months bedridden. Even then, his father accused him of faking it, of seeking attention. That feeling of rejection, of being unwanted and unseen, would follow Gacy for the rest of his life, twisting his mind, feeding his darkness. As a teenager, Gacy wanted out. He moved away from his father's control, working small jobs, then relocating to Las Vegas to start fresh. He worked briefly in a mortuary, sleeping in the embalming room, surrounded by death. It was there that Gacy's disturbing urges began to surface. He later admitted that one night, he climbed into a coffin of a deceased teenage boy, touching, observing, feeling something he didn't fully understand. It terrified him, but it also awakened something dark. He left Las Vegas soon after, returning to Chicago to attend business school. To everyone around him, he seemed ambitious, charming, and driven. He could talk to anyone, charm anyone, the kind of man who seemed destined for success. He got married, had children, and soon began working for KFC as a manager, running 3 franchises owned by his father-in-law. By all appearances, Gacy had turned his life around. He joined local clubs, volunteered in charity events, and quickly became known in the community as a man who cared. But beneath that polished exterior, a storm was brewing. In Waterloo, Iowa, where he settled with his wife, Gacy became a member of the JCs, a local business organization known for community service. But behind the organization's clean image, there was a darker side. Parties involving alcohol, drugs, and pornography. Gacy fit right in. He began inviting young men, often teenage boys, to his basement, showing them pornography, drinking with them, and making sexual advances. In 1968, one of those boys went to the police. Gacy was charged with sexually assaulting a 15-year-old named Donald Voorhees, the son of a fellow JC member. Gacy denied everything, insisting he was being framed. But as the case unfolded, the truth became harder to hide. When another teenager came forward claiming Gacy had hired him to assault Voorhees to silence him, Gacy's fate was sealed. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. His wife divorced him, and his father died shortly after, never forgiving him. For most people, this would have been the end of the story. But for John Wayne Gacy, it was only the beginning. Gacy was released after serving just 18 months for good behavior. He returned to Chicago in 1970, determined to rebuild his image. He started his own construction company, PDM Contractors, and soon became a respected small business owner. Neighbors saw a man who worked hard, who threw parties, who dressed up as Pogo the Clown for charity events and children's hospital. He painted his face, wore colorful clothes, and performed for kids, smiling, joking, dancing. But the smile he painted wasn't just for show. It was a disguise, a mask that hid the predator beneath. Behind the laughter, Gacy's urges had returned, stronger than ever. He began luring young men to his home, some for work, some for parties, some for what he called harmless fun, but many never left. He would handcuff them under the guise of a magic trick. Once bound, there was no escape. Gacy would assault, torture, and strangle his victims, often burying them in the crawl space beneath his own house. He called it the trick. He called it fun. The world had no idea that beneath the cheerful home of a friendly clown, bodies were piling up. It started slowly. A missing boy here, a runaway there. The kind of disappearances that barely made the evening news in 1970s Chicago, a city already struggling with crime, corruption, and economic unrest. But in the quiet suburb of Norwood Park, something monstrous was happening, and no one suspected the man responsible lived right next door. By day, John Wayne Gacy was the picture of community spirit. He threw neighborhood barbecues, hosted political fundraisers, and wore his trademark clown suit for charity events. He knew everyone's name, and everyone trusted him. But by night, Gacy's home became a chamber of horrors. Gacy's first known victim was Timothy McCoy, a 16-year-old boy, traveling from Michigan to Omaha. Gacy offered him a place to stay for the night. The next morning, when McCoy walked into the kitchen holding a knife, apparently preparing breakfast, Gacy panicked and stabbed him to death. Later, he would claim it was self-defense. But in truth, that moment awakened something inside him, a dark craving, a sense of power. He buried McCoy's body in the crawl space beneath his house. That was the beginning of what would become a horrifying ritual. Over the next several years, dozens of young men vanished from the Chicago area. Drifters, runaways, and teenage boys looking for work. Many were last seen near bus stations or convenience stores, approached by a man offering easy money. That man was John Wayne Gacy. He would lure them in with promises of a construction job or a quick-paying gig. Once inside his home, Gacy's personality would shift from charming to chilling. He'd bring out his clown handcuffs, pretending it was part of a trick. He'd say, "You can't get out unless you have the key." When the cuffs clicked, it was too late. What followed was hours of assault, torture, and ultimately, strangulation. Gacy used a rope twisted around a stick, what he called his rope trick. When the deed was done, he'd dig shallow graves beneath his floorboard. He covered each body with lime to slow decomposition, crawling through the dirt himself to stack them layer by layer. When the crawl space filled, he moved to the garage. When that filled, he dumped bodies into the nearby Des Plaines River. Each time, he returned to his life, to his business, his neighbors, his clown shows. He laughed, drank, and smiled, with the stench of death beneath his feet. People loved Gacy. He hosted parties where police officers, city officials, and local businessmen attended. He even posed for photos with the First Lady of the United States, Rosalynn Carter, while volunteering for the Democratic Party. In the picture, he's smiling proudly, wearing an official badge labeled Secret Service. No one knew that, at the same time, there were corpses rotting beneath his home. But not everyone was fooled. Some workers at his construction company whispered that he was odd, that he often hired teenage boys and made strange jokes. Still, no one imagined what was really happening. By 1978, Gacy had murdered at least 30 young men, but it would take one final disappearance, one teenage boy who wouldn't come home, to bring it all crashing down. December 11, 1978, 15-year-old Robert Piest was working at a local pharmacy in Des Plaines, Illinois. It was an ordinary winter evening, cold, quiet, uneventful. John Gacy walked in to discuss a construction job with the owner. When the conversation ended, he mentioned he might have work for a young man who wants to earn some money. Robert, eager to help his family, told his mother he'd be right back, just going to talk to the contractor about a job. He never returned. When Robert's mother reported him missing, the police took notice immediately. Unlike most missing teens, Robert wasn't a runaway. He was a good student, reliable, and close to his family. The name John Wayne Gacy appeared on the police's radar for the first time. Detective Joseph Kozenchak began digging. What he found didn't sit right. Gacy had a prior conviction for sexual assault of a teenage boy in Iowa. That was enough to get a warrant for a search of his house. But Gacy was clever. He kept his property meticulously clean, at least on the surface. The first search revealed nothing unusual, except one small detail. In his living room, police found a smell, faint but distinct. It was the smell of decay. Still, without evidence, they couldn't arrest him. The next few days turned into a psychological battle. Gacy, sensing the walls closing in, tried to charm his way out. He invited detectives into his home, offered them coffee, even joked about the missing boy. But behind the mask, panic was setting in. He started drinking heavily, barely sleeping. Police tailed him 24/7, watching as he drove erratically through the city, visiting rivers, bridges, and bars as though trying to erase something. On December 20th, detectives obtained a second warrant. This time, they were ready. When they entered the house again, they went straight to the crawl space. They broke through the floorboards. What they found stopped them cold. A hand, decomposed, pale, reaching up from the dirt. The smell hit them next, thick, choking, undeniable. Within hours, the house on 81313 West Summerdale Avenue became a crime scene, unlike any Chicago had ever seen. As investigators began digging, the true scale of Gacy's crimes emerged. Body after body, one after another, all buried beneath the same suburban home. Some were stacked on top of each other, wrapped in plastic. Forensic teams worked for days, removing remains in silence. The count grew: 5, 10, 20, 29 bodies in total. Each had a story, each had a name, a family, a life that ended in that house of horror. When Gacy was finally confronted, he didn't deny it. In fact, he confessed with chilling calmness. He called them his boys. He said, "They were all dead when I left them." He blamed Jack, a supposed alternate personality, saying he wasn't responsible for what happened when Jack took over. But there was no Jack. There was only John Wayne Gacy. He had murdered at least 33 young men between 1972 and 1978, one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. In 1980, Gacy stood trial for 33 counts of murder. The courtroom was packed, the nation horrified. The media called him the killer clown. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence: photos, handcuffs, rope, and the chilling testimony of surviving victims who had escaped his assaults. The defense argued insanity, but the jury took less than 2 hours to reach a verdict: guilt. Gacy was sentenced to death by lethal injection. He spent 14 years on death row, painting. Ironically, most of his paintings were of clowns. He even painted Pogo, the smiling monster he once pretended to be. On May 10, 1994, John Wayne Gacy was executed at Stateville Correctional Center in Illinois. His final words: "Kiss my ass." As the chemicals entered his veins, the mask finally slipped away, forever. In the years since his death, Gacy's legacy remains one of pure horror, a man who hid behind a painted smile and fooled an entire community. He taught the world that evil doesn't always come from the shadows. Sometimes it wears a costume, sometimes it shakes your hand, sometimes it makes children laugh, and that is the most terrifying truth of all.